Welcome to Newshour. Tonight, President Trump is back on familiar ground, immigration, in a move that's already lighting fires in capitals across the globe. He's reinstated a sweeping travel ban, blacklisting 12 countries from entry into the United States. From Kabul to Caracas, the backlash has been swift, but Trump says this is about national security, not prejudice. He claims it's a lawful extension of powers first confirmed by the Supreme Court in 2018. So who's on the list this time? Afghanistan, Myanmar, Iran, Somalia, and 8 others. 7 more, including Cuba and Venezuela, face partial bans. The White House cites terrorism risks, inefficient vetting, and visa overstays. Critics, well, they're calling it a political playbook rerun. Xenophobic, divisive, and legally suspect. Let's take a look at this story now in more detail.
US President Donald Trump has signed a travel ban on nationals of 12 countries, barring them from entering the United States. He said the executive order he signed Wednesday was needed to protect against what he called foreign terrorists and other security threats. In a video posted to X, he specifically mentioned Sunday's attack in Colorado that targeted a pro-Israel march.
The recent terror attack in Boulder, Colorado, has underscored the extreme dangers posed to our country by the entry of foreign nationals who are not properly vetted, as well as those who come here as temporary visitors and overstay their visas.
Egypt is not on the list of countries facing travel limits, even though the suspect in the Boulder firebomb attack was an Egyptian national. However, Trump said the list could be revised and new countries could be added. Starting June 9th, there will be a total ban on nationals from Afghanistan, Yemen and Iran in the Middle East, Myanmar and Haiti, and those from 7 African nations such as Somalia, Sudan, and Libya. Meanwhile, there'll be partial restrictions on people from 7 other countries. In that list, there's Cuba, Laos, Venezuela, and Sierra Leone. These all echo an entry ban Trump imposed at the start of his first term on several mainly Muslim countries. That ban was repealed by the Biden administration later on. Then, in a campaign speech in October 2023, Trump previewed a plan to restrict people from Gaza, Libya, Somalia, and other places.
If you're coming from somewhere full of people who want to kill Americans, we will not let you in.
Wednesday's new bans are part of a broader immigration crackdown since the start of Trump's second term. In January 2025, he issued an executive order beefing up security vetting of foreigners seeking admission to the U.S. to root out national security threats. That order directed several cabinet members to give a list of countries to suspend travel from because their, quote, vetting and screening information is so deficient. In response to Trump's order Wednesday, Venezuela's Minister of Interior, Justice and Peace, Diosdado Cabello, called the U.S. government fascist on state TV.
Honestly, being in the US is a big risk for anyone, not just Venezuelans. If you're really that foolish, then go to the United States.
Somalia immediately pledged to work with Washington to address security issues, according to a statement from its ambassador to the US.
Okay, let's now head over to Washington, D.C. and speak with our correspondent there, Tony Waterman. Tony, good to see you. Walk us through then how this new proclamation came about and how the administration has been publicly defending it.
Well, the wheels were really set in motion many months ago. On his very first day in office, President Trump signed an executive order mandating a review of visa vetting. So we were expecting something like this to take place. And in that video announcement on Wednesday night, the president cited national security and foreign terrorists as the reason behind these 12 countries being banned. And they were singled out, he said, because they have, in his words, large-scale presence of terrorists. They fail to cooperate on visa security and have persistently high rates of illegal visa overstays. And he specifically mentioned this terror attack in Boulder, Colorado, this past weekend when 15 pro-Israeli demonstrators were injured when an Egyptian national threw gas bombs on their demonstration. Now, federal authorities say that the suspect had overstayed a tourist visa and that he was in the country illegally, although there is some dispute about that. But Trump said that there are millions of people in the United States just like him. To be fair, though, it is the U.S. State Department, U.S. embassies and consulates abroad that ultimately issue these visas. It's not as if that process is farmed out to third parties. Now, there are going to be certain exceptions and exemptions to this ban. This includes green card holders, dual nationals, diplomats, and people that have visas that have already been approved. But many of the countries on this list are war-torn nations. They have repressive regimes. So it's really going to limit the ability of the most vulnerable in those societies to flee to the United States. But this is part of this wider crackdown on immigration, which is a main pillar of Donald Trump's policy, both domestic and foreign. We have already seen hundreds of thousands of individuals have their visas revoked, people that had protected status under the former Biden administration. The president has also gone after international students coming to the U.S. to study. But this is also this carryover from his first term in office when he barred travelers from 7 Muslim majority nations. But this ban could actually impact more people. The State Department issued about 170,000 visas to citizens from those 12 countries last year alone. And the president made it very clear that this list could be expanded in the future.
Tony, thank you very much indeed joining us there from Washington, D.C. Much appreciated. Now, with Afghanistan on the list, let's cross live now and speak to our correspondent in Kabul, Tameen Bahis. Tameen, good to see you there. What's been the initial reaction then from Afghan officials and the public following their inclusion in this ban?
Well, Guy, so far there's been no official reaction from the Taliban-led authorities here in Kabul to the new US visa ban. We reached out to several spokespeople in the Foreign Ministry and other departments, but there's been no response. The silence might reflect a deliberate political choice, perhaps an unwillingness to escalate tensions with Washington, or it could simply highlight the limited lines of diplomatic engagement that remains between the two sides. Among Afghans I've spoken to, the reaction has been mixed but generally quiet. The visa ban affects a very specific group of people: business travelers, students, patients who used to seek medical care abroad. For them, this is another frustrating barrier in a life that's already full of obstacles. But for the average Afghan struggling just to get by, the news hasn't made much of an impact. In Kabul's crowded bazaars and tea houses, people are far more concerned with the cost of flour, the lack of jobs, or whether their children can find medicine. For many here, the idea of getting a visa to the United States feels completely out of reach. So while this ban may have serious consequences for a small but important segment of society, it simply doesn't register for most who are just focused on survival.
Tameen, given the deepening humanitarian crisis there, how is this likely to affect ordinary Afghans who, to be frank, are already struggling?
That's a good point, Guy. Afghanistan remains in the grip of a deepening humanitarian crisis. The latest UN estimate says more than 23 million people, over half of the population, need assistance this year. And you can feel it everywhere. I was in Western Kabul just yesterday, where several families told me they're relying on bread, tea, and hope to get through the day. Aid is patchy and jobs are scarcer than ever. For most people, the US visa ban doesn't affect them directly. Travel abroad, especially to America, is a distant idea, something only a very small number could ever pursue. What really matters here is finding fuel for winter, putting food on the table, and keeping your children in school. That said, the concern some Afghans have expressed is not about the ban itself, but what it represents. Could this be another signal that Afghanistan is being further cut off from the world? If this isolation grows, it could impact more than just travel. It may discourage investment, limit NGO access, and shrink international aid flows, all of which the country depends on heavily. So while the immediate fallout may seem narrow, the long-term signal is worrying. For a nation already isolated, losing one more bridge, however symbolic, feels like one too many. This is Tamim Bahis in Kabul for Anewz.
Tamim, thank you very much indeed for joining us there from Kabul. Okay, let's delve deeper into this now, examining both the justification and the controversy with Professor Scott Lucas, an expert in US and international relations at the Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Scott, good to see you. Thanks for joining us again on Newshour. Okay, so Trump supporters then would argue that this is a matter of national security. It's not about politics. How justified is this move, given some of the reported shortcomings that are around countries' vetting processes?
So where's the evidence? What I was struck by is that while claiming there was a national security threat for civilians of these 12 countries, there wasn't a single piece of evidence of a threat to national security. While claiming there was a threat from terrorism, there wasn't a single piece of evidence regarding terrorism. As you mentioned earlier, the only case Trump cited was this throwing of Molotov cocktails that injured 15 people in Colorado. But the person who did that is an Egyptian national, and Egypt's not on the list of countries whose civilians are being restricted. What appears to have happened is that the Trump administration, looking both to attack immigrants in general and to get a PR stunt, they went to the list of visa overstays. And they took the countries with the highest rate of visa overstays. These might be students, these might be people in business, it might be tourists. And they took the countries that were in the top 10 of that. They added a couple of other countries. They added Myanmar, they added Iran, for reasons I'm not sure about, and then they produced this, right? Now, while the overstay of a visa might be an issue where you have to deport somebody, and certainly it's something that you have to enforce, overstaying a visa is not a national security threat. But that's the sleight of hand that they've tried to produce, because the Trump administration want to keep the pressure on. They want to keep this drive not only against undocumented immigrants, but they want to severely restrict legal immigration in the United States as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I noticed that in the president's address on this matter, he made a point of talking about visa overstays as being illegal, and many people said, well, yes, technically it is illegal, but it's a very different thing. It's a very different order of illegality to some of the more serious matters. Just on that, to give a perspective on the other side, to what extent do you think this sort of policy, this sort of behaviour does stoke perhaps Islamophobia, prejudice, not just in the US, but in the wider community?
Well, I mean, there are certain countries that are going to, escape this. Azerbaijan, which you all know well, because it has a relatively low visa overstay rate, it doesn't get targeted. Saudi Arabia doesn't get targeted. What I think this does is it illuminates what the Trump administration is trying to do. And that is, they are trying to whip up fear of all, not only immigrants, but of asylum seekers and of refugees. They're trying to use that fear to say, you have to support us. And I've got to be honest with you, there are a lot of Americans who do have this fear that has been whipped up through the falsehoods, the misinformation about immigration. And the Trump folks play upon that. And that does lead, I think, as you're hinting, that leads to serious social divisions. So within the United States, you will have people from certain countries who are treated with more suspicion. You will have an increase in violence against those people. And yes, you will have an increase in people who happen to be Muslim amongst that. I'll add one other thing, though, to treat a specific case, which I think is where the Trump administration is flipping American political culture. A few years ago, you would have said that most Americans would have said that people from Afghanistan deserve to be protected when the Taliban came to power because of the Taliban's record of brutality. Within the past few months, the Trump administration has not only removed protected status from those Afghans who are in the United States, rendering them subject to deportation, they're now saying that any Afghan who tries to get to the United States because of that fear of life in their country, doors are shut.
Scott, back in 2018, the Supreme Court did uphold a similar ban. What do you think might happen this time when it comes to legal precedent?
Yeah, I never want to predict which way you go, but it's interesting how that case played out in 2017, 2018. Initially, you might remember in what was the Muslim ban, when the Trump administration went after civilians from 6 mainly Muslim countries, the court struck that down because of the religious element here, religious discrimination. So the Trump administration added a couple of non-Muslim countries. I think it was Venezuela and North Korea, and they got that ban through the courts, but only on a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court, who gave the executive sweeping authority to do this. Now, here we are again 8 years later. And I think on the surface, you would say the Supreme Court has given a wide berth to the president to declare national security grounds for this act. But given that there are 19 countries with either full or partial bans, there may be a requirement from the courts which says, where's your evidence? Where is the threat to national security? We have seen this come up in a series of immigration cases that the Trump administration has lost in recent weeks. I'm not saying that they'll lose this case if it goes to the Supreme Court, but I think it's open. I don't think it's clear cut that the Trump folks will be able to have clear sailing on this legally.
Scott, you touched on this at the start, this idea of an lack of evidence when it comes to this notion that, you know, the president's really targeting government dysfunction, not race or religion. It seems like your point of view is that actually there's a lack of evidence to support that claim. Is that right?
Yeah, look, I'll give you a fundamental that you start from. And I will say this, I must tell you, as someone who was an immigrant in the UK for 40 years, immigrants are 40% less likely in the United States than US citizens to commit crimes, including violent crimes. That's also true, by the way, in the UK. Now, if you got the facts out, using Trump's logic, you would say that the biggest concern for the Trump administration should be US citizens. But of course, that's not the game that they're playing here. And I think you actually highlighted something here. The reason why you have these 12 countries on the list, or in many cases, you have countries which are very repressive, which are countries which have gone through civil war or gone through insurgency. So their systems are not necessarily up to scratch regarding the way they treat their civilians. But up to this point, the international approach to this, including on the Convention on Asylum Seekers, the Convention on Refugees, which has stood since the 1950s, is that you protect people who are coming out of those countries, not that you force them to stay in those countries if they are threatened. So the Trump administration effectively becomes an enabler of repressive regimes rather than actually standing up against them.
Scott, thank you very, very much for joining us. Much appreciated. Well, that does bring us to the end of Newshour. As ever, the debate over security and values continues to divide both politics and public opinion. We'll keep tracking the global fallout from today's proclamation and what it means in practice. From all of us here at Anewz, thanks for being with us.